The following story is for entertainment purposes only. It's called I Was Earth's Ambassador for a Murderous Alien Race, and Negotiations Have Failed. Bill's story began several years ago, when he was a rising star in the mechanisms of the federal government and planning on a career within the political establishment in DC. This never came to pass, however, as he received what he thought at the time was a better job offer. Believe it or not, the employment opportunity that led him to this current predicament began in a typically cloak and dagger manner. He was approached by a high-level but essentially anonymous black-suited individual who claimed to work off the books for an agency interested in recruiting him for a special assignment. One that wouldn't just help his country, but the entire human race. So he was told. To him, it sounded so ridiculous, he almost laughed in the man's face. But he noted his expression was deadly serious, and guessed he wouldn't react well to the mockery. Besides, he had to admit that he was intrigued by the man's mysterious offer. The opportunity he'd been presented with sounded too good to be true, and he thought taking on this unusual job role could propel his career to previously unheard heights, and so he accepted the offer. What's happening, y'all? It's your boy nightgod. Please like, follow, and subscribe before watching this video. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I post. Also, I'm going to be posting these videos to Spotify for Podcaster, and the audio will be on my podcast, nightgod 333 Secrets Revealed, on all platforms. So make sure you guys check those out, give me a follow, and listen in. And started down the path of no return. Had he known the full truth back then, he would have told the G-Man to go to hell, but he didn't. As a result, here he was. Jump forward 6 months, and Bill completed an intensive training program and attended a series of extraordinary briefings which had changed everything he thought he knew about our world and the wider universe. He used to believe that us human beings were at the top of the food chain, but now he knew better. He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when his courage had failed him, and he realized he no longer had any control over his situation. It wasn't when he was flown on board a military transport plane to a secret base in Solomon Islands where he received his final briefing on this highly classified mission. Sure, he was nervous when they strapped him to the sea on board an experimental X-37C orbital test vehicle, the best in the U.S. Space Force's inventory. He feels he stood up pretty well during the launch into orbit as he joined a small club of humans who had traveled to space. Although the actual numbers were far higher than most people knew, he thought about the significance of the event and importance of his mission, whilst also realizing that few would ever know what he'd embarked on. Only a select number of top echelons of the US government would know of his mission, and the X-37 launch was a highly classified secret. Our rivals in China and Russia will be watching closely, of course, but their governments had been briefed and were in support of the operation. On this issue, if nothing else, all the nations on Earth were on the same side. Now, if the launch into orbit was scary enough, their approach to the alien ship was truly terrifying. They saw the image on the screen, that of a huge, cigar-shaped spacecraft capable of interstellar travel, which dwarfed the craft he was on, and was adorned with high-tech weaponry beyond our wildest dreams. Our tiny X-37 was puny and pathetic in comparison, seeming like nothing more than a primitive canoe paddling towards a mighty battleship. He realized then that their alien host could easily blast them into oblivion with the mere push of a button. But why would they destroy an unarmed diplomatic mission, one might ask? Well, the answer is that it's simply in their nature to be cruel and violent. This will become self-evident as Bill's account continued. Bill had thought his nerves finally shattered after they completed the complex docking procedure and boarded the alien warship. He was going through the invasive and thorough scanning process before they were permitted entry. He can vividly recall sitting in the holding area, a grim and dark cell of cold metal as they waited to discover their fate. His sole companion was one Captain Henderson, a hardened Special Forces veteran who was as tough as they came. Henderson was tasked with acting as Bill's bodyguard during this dangerous mission. Their alien host didn't allow them to bring weapons on board the ship, but Henderson assured him that he was an expert in hand-to-hand combat and he would be able to protect him if things went south. Bill wasn't so confident, however. As they sat in the darkened cell, Bill couldn't help but notice how Henderson was perspiring heavily as he struggled to contain his fear. He had good reason to be afraid, as did Bill. You may have heard of the alien race they were tasked to negotiate with. Their technology is far more advanced than ours, and they have been capable of interstellar travel for thousands of years, having first visited Earth around 1,000 years ago. He'd never seen one in person, but their physical description was terrifying. A red-scaled reptilian race with cold predatory eyes and sharp teeth, claws that could rip through human flesh without any need of super advanced weaponry. What's more, they are a cruel and war-seeking species who secretly visit Earth for one reason only: to find victims for their torturous games and sadistic hunts. Those unfamiliar with their origins simply call them reptilians or lizard people. They don't know the full story, however, since the global governments have hidden the truth from the people for hundreds of years. The reptilians are in fact the Empire of Astro, a militaristic interstellar species from the TRAPPIST-1 star system, who waged bloody war upon their neighbors for millennia before a new galactic order established an uneasy peace to keep the custodians and other aggressors in check. But the Galactic Federation didn't stop the custodians from abducting, torturing, and murdering thousands of our citizens every year. In the United States, they simply turn a blind eye to these abductions, which inevitably occur in isolated areas, and the people they take are usually those who aren't missed: the homeless, drug addicts, or simply those without family and friends. In other countries, totalitarian regimes take the opportunity to donate victims to the Astri as a form of tribute, sending them prisoners, political dissidents, and so-called undesirables, as they cynically use the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. This has been the state of affairs for too long, as the world leaders have sought to justify their collusion with the reptilian mass murderers, believing that the sacrifice of countless thousands is necessary for the greater good, and because they fear the consequences of denying the alien slavers, knowing all too well that the custodians could devastate the Earth's surface with their highly advanced weaponry with the touch of a button. But things have changed in recent times, which is why they sent Bill on this dangerous yet crucial diplomatic mission. For the first time in human history, we had a trump card to use against the custodians, and the powers that be back on Earth decided to try and play it. And so he potentially had the future of humanity on his shoulders. That's a lot of pressure. But as he sat in the holding area, he only hoped that the custodians wouldn't renege on their promise to allow he and his colleague an audience, and wouldn't instead simply throw the two of them out of the airlock, leaving them to die in the cold vacuum of space. He almost jumped out of his skin when he heard the hidden speakers burst to life, and a mechanical voice spoke to them in near word-perfect English. Representative of planet Earth, the screening process has been completed, and you are permitted to board the SS Glory of the Empire. Proceed through the door and make your way down the corridor to the passenger cell. Once you are secure and contained, we shall continue the journey to our final destination. With that, a previously invisible door in the steel wall ahead of them slid open, revealing a dimly lit and uninviting corridor, which led to yet another door at its end. Bill experienced a moment of fearful trepidation, finding himself temporarily unable to stand and walk until Captain Henderson silently pulled him up from his feet and practically frog-marched him through the doorway. He whispered sternly in his ear whilst doing so, "They're watching. Don't show the fuckers any weakness or they'll destroy us." His harsh words sent a cold shudder down Bill's spine, but he knew he was right. His extensive briefings on the custodians' culture and psychology left little doubt. All of our intelligence pointed to the custodians as lacking any empathy or mercy, at least towards the human race anyway. Certainly they believed in their own version of social Darwinism, an extreme ideology stating that only the strong would survive in the ruthless universe, and weaker species should be crushed or enslaved or extinct. He tried to control his fear as he sheepishly stepped forward, his knees trembling as he followed Henderson down the dark, featureless corridor of cold steel, barely stopping himself from jumping when the airlock at the far end slid open to reveal what the ship's AI had disconcertingly described as the passenger cell. As they cautiously walked inside, they saw a room not much different from the one that they just left. Cold, dark, featureless, and hostile. Although they noted two cockpit-style chairs which seemed to have been designed for the human body. They were surprised since they've been told not to expect any level of hospitality from their alien hosts, as the custodians regarded humans as an inferior species and certainly not their equals. Bill was highly suspicious, however, fearing that this could be a trap. Looking to the hard-faced Henderson, he thought about asking him what he thought of this, but then he remembered that their hosts were almost certainly watching and listening to everything they said and did. So he decided against it. Henderson took his seat without uttering a word, quickly and effectively strapping himself in for the space journey to come. Bill followed his lead, watching him closely as he repeated the captain's actions to secure his seatbelt. He didn't know how Henderson knew what to do and how he stayed so calm and confident under the circumstances. Bill figured it was his training kicking in as he quickly adapted to this alien environment. Bill wished he had this confidence, but What they were facing scared the shit out of him. The experts at NASA and the Air Force had warned them that they'd be making a journey that would normally last months or even years in one of our rockets, but their journey would take just a few short hours. They had little knowledge of the custodians' technology, and most of our assumptions regarding their spacecraft were based on theory at best. The assumption at the time was that Henderson and Bill would be traveling farther out than any other Earth based life forms had ever done before, and they would be subject to a G force which no human being had previously experienced. They had no idea whether their bodies would even survive such a journey, and they had to take whatever assurances the custodians had given them regarding the men's physical safety. They took it with a grain of salt. So one can imagine the fear that Bill experienced when the ship's engines came to life and they were propelled through space at a tremendous speed. Imagine Bill's surprise and relief when he discovered that the journey was not only survivable, but also relatively comfortable, no worse than his time aboard the X-37 that brought them into orbit. The flight deep into our own solar system lasted a mere 3 hours, and Bill felt his confidence growing as he realized that he would make it through this leg of the journey. Maybe the custodians were genuine about wanting to enter negotiations, he told himself. Perhaps they were finally granting humans the respect that we felt we deserved. This is what he thought, but now he knows he'd been lulled to sleep into a false sense of security. He could remember the moment they arrived at their destination, the ship slowing as a shutter screen on the far wall of their cell opened to reveal a stunning scene. Before them was Jupiter, the majestic gas giant and the largest planet in our solar system. Bill gazed out of the porthole in absolute awe, admiring the mighty planet's glorious atmospheric bands and the famous Great Red Spot, an enormous anticyclonic storm which had raged for centuries and was large enough in the dimensions to swallow up the Earth several times over. He found himself mesmerized by Jupiter's beauty and felt very humbled, knowing that he was one of the first human beings to observe the planet with the naked eye. The alien ship descended through Jupiter's orbit, accelerating towards the great and rocky moon, which Bill recognized as Europa. As they approached the moon, he spotted a grotesque, artificial structure half buried into the rock's surface. A collection of steel fortifications and powerful space-based weapons he understood were connected to a vast network of subterranean tunnels and chambers. His jaw dropped as he surveyed the ugly, austere facility, the custodian's main base in the solar system. The Europa outpost has existed for decades, and the Earth's governments have known about it for just as long. The Voyager probes had observed and photographed the facility from afar, and many other missions have documented it over the years. We knew it was the custodian's main staging post for its clandestine raids on Earth, but little else. Going in, he didn't know what to expect, but he was sure their alien hosts were showing us their moon base as a means of intimidation. There were signs of battle all around them, and he noted the twisted debris of destroyed ships and war machines trapped in Jupiter's orbit. Meanwhile, the surface of Europa was riddled with fresh craters, surely the result of an orbital bombardment of misdirected missiles. He silently glanced across at Henderson and noted the disappointment in his eyes, a feeling which Bill shared. Both of them had hoped that the custodians would have suffered greater damage. As said before, Earth's governments have long been helpless in the face of custodian incursions, but this has recently changed. A year before Bill was recruited to this secret diplomatic mission, Earth's space watchers had observed a fierce battle in our planet's orbit, as the custodian hunting ship was engaged and apparently destroyed by a vessel of unknown origin. This even might have remained a mystery had it not been for the unexpected landing of a small capsule deep into the American Midwest. This escape pod containing 2 human survivors who had an extraordinary tale to tell. Through the first-hand accounts, we not only learned the horrifying turret of what the custodians did to their abductees, but we also discovered the existence of a potential ally, the Galactic Federation, whose forces are at war with the rogue custodian hunters. News of the space battle finally forced our leaders into action, and a secret council demanded that the custodians agree to a meeting to renegotiate the terms of the agreement. But this wasn't the end of the story. During Bill's training, they received word of a second space battle detected by our long-range telescopes as a small fleet of ships had assaulted the Europa base, resulting in an amazing yet terrifying display of fire and fury. They hadn't known the outcome of the battle until now, but it seemed clear that their hosts had won the fight. Bill experienced terrible foreboding as the ship made its final approach down the vast moon base, the mighty vessel being dwarfed by the huge sprawling facility as they docked on a landing bay with a heavy metallic clunk. He was beginning to realize just how far behind humanity was in this arms race. Once the ship docked, they received further instructions from the disembodied robotic voice. We arrived at the Empire's Alpha facility. You should remove your restraints and wait for our representative who will guide you inside the base. They did as they were told, Henderson and Bill sharing a look as they undid their seatbelts and stood up. The far door activated, and Bill mentally prepared himself to see a custodian warrior in the flesh for the first time. He'd heard the witness descriptions and seen what few photographs and film footage they had of them, but this wasn't adequate preparation. He took a deep breath as the automated door slid open, but was disappointed by what he saw on the other side. They were met by some kind of robotic drone hovering in the air as its scanners and cameras observed them and collected data. He remembered witness accounts of the Confederation war machines and wondered whether the custodians had adopted the same model. The two of them stood in confusion as the robot spoke. I am Unit 537, an AI drone in the service of the glorious Custodian Empire. I have been tasked by my masters with guiding you through our facility and concluding our negotiations. Bill was left flabbergasted and found himself unable to speak as he tried to process the unexpected development. In the end, it was Henderson who broke the silence as he launched into an uncharted outburst. What the hell is this? Where are the custodian delegates? This is not what we agreed upon. The flying robot turned to face Bill's military companion before answering in the same monotone mechanical voice. I know nothing of these arrangements you speak of. Let me assure you that I have been granted the necessary plenipotentiary powers by my masters. I would also advise you not to engage in any more emotional outbursts. My masters may view such tirades as acts of aggression and will respond accordingly. Now you must follow me. With that, the drone swung around and entered the facility. Bill shot Henderson an angry look and whispered, What the hell were you thinking? Are you trying to get us both killed? Henderson simply shook his head in despair before saying, No plan survives first contact with the enemy. We need to adapt. Bill stared at his companion in confusion, wanting to ask him what he meant, but Henderson simply nodded and said, Come on, let's go. He proceeded through the open doorway, and Bill followed, not yet realizing they were walking straight into a living hell. The interior of the Europa base was slightly less bleak and intimidating than the spaceship, but only marginally so. The corridor walls were white and sterile, and his nostrils filled with what smelled like disinfectant. As soon as he set foot inside, he felt something was terribly wrong, and a sense of impending doom swept over his body. Bill was frightened and on edge, but it was more than that. Within a few seconds, his head was pounding, the pain growing inside his skull until it was almost unbearable. He felt naked, exposed, like suddenly his deepest thoughts and secrets were there for the whole universe to see. And it got worse. Suddenly, his aching brain was assaulted by horrific, terrible images. He saw human beings being tortured by vile custodian killers, a man ripped to shreds by claws and teeth, a screaming woman strapped to a gurney and operated on without anesthetic, and many more scenes of ultra-violence. The images he saw inside his head were so vivid that he could almost hear the blood-curdling screams and smell the gory viscera. He struggled to stay on his feet and see straight, turning his head to look upon his companion. Any hope he had for support faded as he saw Henderson fighting his own internal battle against whatever psychological weapon the custodians had deployed against them. Sweating profusely as his eyes bulged and face burnt red, he reckoned he was using all his mental strength in an attempt to keep the enemy out of his head, although he doubted he would be successful. This was a new tactic which they hadn't been warned about during their briefings, and frankly, that terrified Bill. What chance did they have if the custodians could destroy their minds as well as their bodies? The pressure built up inside Bill's skull until he thought his head would explode, and for a horrible moment, he believed they would kill him through this vile method. But the assault upon their brains ended as suddenly as it began, the pressure lifting and sadistic messages disappearing, although he couldn't forget the horrors he had seen. Their robotic guide acted like nothing had happened, leading them to yet another automatic door at the end of the sickly white corridor as it turned to address us in its deadpan mechanical voice. My masters thought you might wish to visit your fellow Homo sapiens, who we accommodate at this facility. I will now show you our holding pens. Bill felt a sickness deep in the pit of his stomach, and after hearing the drone's emotionless words, casting a glance towards Henderson in the moment before the next door slid open. The first thing that hit him was the smell, the foul stench of waste that reminded him of zoos or kennels. And then he heard the wailing screams of agony and pain, which he was horrified he learned came from human lips. Their robotic guide led the way as Henderson and Bill entered into a living hell under glaring artificial lights. They were sickened yet awestruck at the horrific scenes they witnessed. Beyond the doorway was a vast bunker filled with rows of steel cages, and they were stacked on top of each other all the way up to the ceiling. We saw thousands of 6x6 cages, each containing one human prisoner, abductees imprisoned by the custodians for their sadistic purposes. They saw people of all races, all creeds, male, female, young, old. Their alien captors treated them all with the same contempt and cruelty. All had no clothes, except for this ugly shock collar secured to their necks. And as Bill walked closer, he saw how all were emaciated, left to live in their own filth. Many bore scars and injuries, surely as a result of the torture they'd endured. Others looked sick, and more than a few appeared to be on the verge of death. But the most horrifying moment came when the many prisoners noticed our presence, the word quickly spreading through nervous but excited whispers between cages. Suddenly, thousands of eyes lit up with something very dangerous indeed: hope. A moment later, thousands of voices were calling in dozens of languages, crying and begging as men walked past them, pleading for us to save them. Bill couldn't take it. The hellish din was too much. The worst thing is, he realized they were powerless to help these damn souls. Even if the custodians did agree to release their prisoners, they had no means of transporting them back to Earth. He doubted any of these poor bastards knew where they were, but they surely guessed what terrible fate awaited them. He felt like dropping to his knees and rolling into a protective ball as the desperate wails nearly burst his eardrums. But then all the prisoners emitted a new sound, one of shocked pain, as every one of them collapsed in agony, screaming as they clutched hold of their throats and squirmed on the floors of their cells. To his horror, Bill realized that the prisoners' shock collars had all been activated at the same time. It was a form of collective punishment. Despite his terror, he screamed out in anger and challenged their host. "How dare you! You damn savages have no right to treat our people this way!" He quickly realized how foolish his words were as soon as he spoke them. The drone swerved around to face him, and he wondered why he'd even taken his anger out on an AI which merely served the cruel custodians and probably had no capacity for independent thought. The hovering robot looked over him, with its inbuilt camera lights flashing on control panels as it processed data, and when the machine spoke, its words didn't contain even a trace of humanity. "Quiet. I have warned you both about the consequences of emotional outbursts. Let us proceed to the amphitheater, where you may witness the fruits of my master's work." With that, the robot trunked and flew forward, leaving Henderson and him behind to look upon the defeated prisoners, all wounded and silent as they glared down upon us with disappointment in their eyes. They quickly came to the terrible realization that they weren't here to help them, and somehow those silent, reproachful looks were even worse than their screams and cries for mercy. Bill thought it couldn't get any worse, but then they exited the prison chamber and entered into a whole new circle of hell. They walked out onto an empty stand overlooking an oval-shaped arena with a circular pitch around 100 foot in diameter, surrounded by 10-foot walls on every side. The surface of the arena was covered by a strange, plastic-like substance, although oval, had permitted low-tech feel when compared to the rest of the facility. However, Bill was amazed at the sheer size of the moon base, which could accommodate a small stadium. Racking his brains, he tried to think and soon realized how this zone reminded him of the Roman Colosseum, and his heart sank as he considered the terrifying implications of his observation. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to a ring of VIP-style boxes set above the stands as steel shutters slowly ascended to reveal the horrifying scene. This was the first time he saw them in the flesh, the custodians. Dozens of alien dignitaries sitting and standing in luxurious boxes behind thick glass, all looking down upon us with a sadistic glee in their cold reptilian eyes, as they exposed their fangs and salivated from their snout-like mouths. Bill swayed from side to side in a panic, realizing that these vile creatures were all around them, although they remained behind their transparent barriers, apparently waiting for something to happen. Henderson shot up straight as his instincts kicked in. He automatically reached for a weapon he did not carry, before shooting our robotic guide a look that could kill. "What the hell is the meaning of this?" he demanded. The drone's cameras observed him with cold indifference, and Bill guessed all of its observations were being beamed up to the custodian dignitaries watching over us. The machine answered his companion's angry question in its usual emotionless, robotic tone. "My masters have arranged for some entertainment for your visit. I suggest you stay silent and watch." Bill was still trying to work out what the machine meant when he observed a hidden door opening in the circular wall of the arena below them, revealing what looked like a chute leading down to the plastic-covered ground. He watched on in shocked horror as one, two, then three bodies slid down the chute, all landing heavily on the ground before the door slammed shut, trapping them inside the walled arena. At first, he thought the three people were dead, but it turned out they were only disoriented or possibly even drugged, as within a few moments all had regained some level of composure and were able to stand up on their shaking legs. He saw they were all young men, half naked and emaciated, a terror present in their eyes as they surveyed their new prison. A moment later, a second compartment opened to reveal a steel rack filled with handheld weapons, including what looked like machetes, axes, and short swords. The scared trio looked at the weapons in confusion, clearly having little idea of why they were there and what was expected of them. Unfortunately, Bill now had a good idea of what was about to happen. Suddenly, seconds later, a door slid open on the far side of the arena and something horrifying emerged, charging out to the killing floor with all the fury in hell. The custodians, which he saw seemed larger than average, perhaps as tall as 8 foot in height. He saw old scars cut across its red scales, and so guessed this beast was a veteran warrior. Its lizard eyes were those of a cold and calculating predator, and methodically scanning the kill zone as it sought out its victims. The warrior was armed with a long pike-like weapon, but it hardly needed the spear, as its teeth and claws were surely sufficient to tear the victims to shreds. Bill looked to the sealed boxes above and noted how the custodian spectators leaned forward, their eyes widening with excitement as they relished the prospect of the violence to come. And then he glanced down to the 3 young men in the line of fire, all confused, exposed, and terrified as they cast their eyes upon the beast. Bill wanted to shout out a warning to these men, but what good would it do? Henderson and he were powerless to intervene. The custodian warrior charged forward at an astonishing speed, unceasing an animalistic roar as it closed in on its prey. 2 of the men fled, running back to the wall and desperately trying to find a way out. The 3rd prisoner froze in the middle of the arena, dropping to his knees and begging for mercy, but of course, he got none. Bill expected the warrior to run him through with a spear, but instead, it unleashed a high kick, deftly using the 6-inch claw on its foot to slice deep into the man's neck, immediately unaliving him on the spot. The other 2 watched their companion's limp body drop to the ground as he breathed his last breaths. The surviving men now know that their only chance was to fight, and so they grasped hold of the primitive weapons from the rack, the first taking a machete and the second arming himself with a sword. The sword-wielding man looked oriental in his origin and seemed to have some combat skills. He was brave too, running forward to meet the reptile head-on and parrying the heavy blows from its spear. The fight didn't last long, however, as the sheer force of the custodian's attack knocked the man down, forcing the sword from his hands. The human screams as the alien brought its foot down upon his head, digging its claw deep into the skull. The 3rd and final man wasn't much of a fight, but did take his chance attacking the beast from behind and hacking at it with his machete. The custodian's scaly hide was thick, but the blade still penetrated, causing the beast to cry out in pain and fury. It was hurt, but not badly, soon turning around to face its attacker. The human took one look into the alien killer's eyes and broke, throwing down his weapon and fleeing across the arena. The warrior didn't miss a beat, lifting its spear and throwing it with immense strength. The projectile flew through the air, striking the man in his back so hard that it went through and stuck him to the arena wall. The alien warrior roared in celebration, with its comrades being equally as happy with the outcome, banging their claws against the glass in excitement as their sadistic urges were satisfied. Bill looked to Henderson and saw his fists were clenched tight and his face was red with fury. As for him, he just felt sick to his stomach at the atrocity they'd been forced to witness. He shook his head in disgust as he looked upon the hovering machine and sputtered out his emotional words. What's the point of all this? Why bring us all the way out here just to watch our people getting tortured and killed? We thought you wanted to negotiate, damn you. The robot paused briefly before delivering its telling response. Actually, my masters agreed to those negotiations in good faith. Your side has broken the terms of our agreement. He was left astonished and confused by the statement they were making. What the hell do you mean? Bill demanded. Your scan came up clear, the AI explained, but your companions raised a red flag. He turned to face Henderson, only to find out he would not look him in the eye. Bill noticed his face had dropped and turned pale white as the sweat dripped off from his brow. Bill was left speechless, but their robotic guide continued to explain the situation. The trace was subtle, but our sensors detected a viral infection in Captain Henderson's blood. Analysis of the viral infection confirmed that it's genetically modified, specifically designed to be harmless to Homo sapiens, but lethal to the custodian species. Clearly, the intention of Earth's government was to infect and destroy the custodian population of this base with their crude biological weapon. Bill's jaw dropped in disbelief, and he thought it has to be a lie. He turned to Henderson in hope of reassurance, only to see him charge the robot with malicious intent. But the machine reacted instantly, extending a mechanical arm and firing a dart into Henderson's chest. He stumbled backwards, looking upon Bill with guilt before his eyes rolled up into his skull and he collapsed heavily onto the stand. Bill turned in time to see the killer robot before aiming its extended arm in his direction as it prepared to fire a second shot. "Wait!" he shouted, but it was futile. The dart stuck him in the center of his chest, causing him pain, but not fatal injury. Whatever poison the dart contained coursed through his veins, and suddenly his body went numb. Next, he felt himself falling as his legs gave in, and he hit the ground hard. The whole world went black. Bill awoke slowly, still feeling groggy as he opened his eyes and tried to move, only to find that he could not. To his horror, he found himself inside a tight cage, hanging over an enclosure of some kind. He could hardly move as the cage was so small, and when he looked down, he saw thick green vegetation with plants that looked tropical in nature and a clearing directly below where they hang. Glancing to his left, he found his companion, Captain Henderson, awake and also trapped in a tight cage hanging over the enclosure. Bill opened his dry lips and forced out his words, shouting angrily as he chastised Henderson for his betrayal. "What the fuck, man? You let them inject you with a biological weapon? Are you crazy?" Henderson lowered his head, once again not making eye contact with Bill. "I was only following orders," said Henderson. "Whose orders?" replied Bill. "What lunatic ordered this attack? What made them think this madness would actually work?" "It was always a long shot, but the brass believed it was our best chance." "But why? Why wasn't I told? What the fuck happened to our negotiations?" said Bill. Henderson sneered dismissively before answering. "Wake the hell up, man. The diplomatic mission was just a cover. We can't negotiate with these monsters. They treat us like prey, for God's sake. The real mission was always a military one, and both of us are expendable." Bill was shocked, horrified, and angry upon hearing Henderson's revelation, although he had to admit that it made sense. But one thing was clear: Henderson's mission had failed, and now they were both probably going to die. As if on cue, they heard a heavy rustling from the vegetation below, as something big pushed through the dense jungle, making its way towards the clearing. They knew whatever beasts they'd unleashed would be bad, very bad. But what emerged into the clearing was beyond their worst nightmares. The following limited words will never do this monster justice, but the best comparison he could make is to a black spider grown to an enormous size. Its body must have been twice the size of a fully grown man, complete with 8 thick, long legs covered in a fur-like hair, and the creature had a set of a dozen dark eyes like a kaleidoscope, which scanned the kill zone with a predatory zeal. But as if it wasn't bad enough, the spider-like beast also had a long, thick tail with what looked like a stinger at the end, sharp, protruding, and dripping with what looked like venom. The monster squealed with excited glee when it saw them hanging in their cages from above. They could guess what their captors had in store for them. There was an ominous beeping noise, and a moment later, the bottom of Henderson's cage opened up, causing him to plummet down to the clearing below. Bill cringed by the sickening crack as he landed heavily and guessed that the military man broke his ankle. But to his credit, he got up on his feet and faced the monster. The beast scurried forward on its 8 legs, screeching like a banshee as it lashed out with its stinger. Henderson managed to dodge the first 2 attacks, but the third struck him in the shoulder, causing him to scream in pain as he fell to the ground. He could only watch in shocked horror as the wounded Henderson attempted to crawl to safety, but the monster struck him again, using its stinger to impale the helpless soldier through the back. His companion screamed again, louder this time. He looked up at Bill with pain and terror in his bloodshot eyes, and a moment later the beast dragged him back into the thick undergrowth, Henderson still screaming as he faced his terrible fate. He didn't want to imagine what was happening to Henderson, but just then, the familiar robot voice called out to reveal the horrifying truth. "My masters want you to know that the Predator will not kill Captain Henderson. She will lay her eggs inside of his still living flesh, keeping him alive until they hatch, after which her offspring will feast upon him. The whole process will last several days, and will be excruciating for your companion." Bill shuddered in cold terror, the sickness rising from the pit of his stomach as he dry heaved in disgust. He could barely speak through his trembling, but somehow managed to utter a reply. "I suppose this is the same thing that's going to be done to me?" The robot replied, "My masters will spare you and allow you to return to your home planet. You are being spared to deliver a message to your leaders. Tell them what you saw here and inform them that their treachery has been discovered. There will be repercussions for their deceit in due course. In the meantime, we are doubling the quota within 1 of your weeks. Failure to comply will result in severe penalties." Those thinly veiled threats chilled him to his bones as he continued to hear Henderson's muffled screams as his cage was slowly lifted away from the beast's enclosure. As it happened, the custodians kept their word and sent Bill home. He's almost ashamed to admit his relief at living through the ordeal and how he's racked with survivor's guilt, not to mention terrified of what the custodians will do next. Once he got home, he was inevitably debriefed and extensively and aggressively by various government suits and military brass, continuously ordered to recount the events of their botched mission. He knew how badly they fucked up, and so did they. They were terrified of the inevitable backlash. Bill believed some of his interrogators would have liked to pin the blame on him, but the others must have disagreed, because eventually he was released. But he expects he doesn't have much longer in this world. However, several witnesses have fallen victim to unfortunate accidents in recent months. The world leaders are scared because they know the custodians could come at any time. They'll do anything to save their own ass and to cover up their mistake, and this includes sacrificing thousands of their own people as tributes to these monsters. And so Bill decided to tell this story before it's too late. The threat we all face is more serious than ever. He doesn't know how we can win this war, but we must stand and fight, because the price of doing nothing is too much to bear. So I hope y'all enjoyed that crazy story. A base on one of Jupiter's moons. Some of the craziest stuff I've ever heard. And I've also heard that this isn't far off of how if they exist, reptilians or custodians are. They despise humans, and whether they capture us or not, I don't know. But if they exist, they aren't our number one fans. So I will be telling some more of their stories. I actually have some really cool stories that go into how the reptilians are raised and how the soldiers become soldiers and what causes them to be so hateful and spiteful of humanity and every other weaker race of alien in our galaxy. So make sure you stay tuned because those stories are wild. Again, don't forget, check out my podcast, nightgod 333 Secrets Revealed. It's on all major platforms. If you want to watch the videos, though, Spotify does allow videos. So go ahead and go to Spotify if you could. Give me a follow there, especially telling stories like this. I think it could be something that could break me out in the podcast realm. So I appreciate you guys. Love you guys. And again, hope you enjoyed this. Always for entertainment purposes only. It may or may not be true. But stay in the love. Stay in the light. Be kind to others. Your boy is out.